The lunchtime crowd at the Glass Garden Cafe was as steady as the rhythm of a clock. Businessmen with laptops, mothers with strollers, college students hunched over iced coffee and essays. The air smelled faintly of roasted almonds and fresh bread. Behind the counter, Naomi Parker, 21, adjusted her apron and greeted a new table with her usual quiet smile. She had the kind of grace that made customers feel at ease. Calm, attentive, never overbearing. Around her neck hung a small gold necklace, its chain thin and slightly worn. Holding a tiny heart-shaped locket, she never took it off. It was one of the few things she owned that felt irreplaceable. As she carried a tray of tea toward table 3, she noticed an older woman sitting alone near the window. Silver hair, elegant posture, and clothes that spoke of quiet wealth, not flashy but refined. Her tailored cream jacket matched the soft tones of the cafe perfectly. The woman looked up with kind but observant eyes. "Dear, could I have a pot of chamomile tea and something light? Perhaps a salad?" "Of course, ma'am," Naomi said, her voice soft. "Would you like lemon with your tea?" "Please," the woman replied. "And thank you for asking." Her tone carried the warmth of someone used to being served, but still aware enough to be polite. Naomi smiled and jotted the order down. The name on the reservation card said Margaret Whitmore. Naomi didn't recognize it, but a co-worker whispered later that she was some kind of business magnate, the founder of a major design company. Worth more than most people could imagine, Naomi didn't care much about that. To her, customers were people, polite or rude, kind or distracted. Everyone just needed something. When Naomi brought out the tea, Margaret looked up from her phone and smiled. "That's a lovely necklace you're wearing." Naomi's hand instinctively rose to touch it. "Thank you. Is it vintage?" Margaret asked, her voice curious. Naomi hesitated. "It's old, yes. My mother gave it to me when I was little." Margaret's eyes softened. "It's beautiful. The engraving on the locket, I haven't seen a pattern like that in years." Naomi glanced down at it. The small heart was etched with delicate vines and tiny initials on the back, letters faint from age. Margaret leaned slightly forward. "May I see it?" Naomi blinked, surprised, but nodded gently. She unclasped the chain and handed it to the older woman. Margaret held it carefully in her palm, her expression changing from polite curiosity to something else, something distant and trembling. Her eyes widened slightly. She brushed a thumb over the back of the locket, and her lips parted. "This can't be," she whispered. Naomi frowned. "Is something wrong?" Margaret looked up slowly, her face pale. "Where did your mother get this?" Naomi hesitated. She said it was a gift. From someone who helped her when she was young. "I never met them." Margaret swallowed, her voice barely a breath. "What was your mother's name?" "Angela," Naomi said softly. "Angela Parker." For a long moment, Margaret said nothing. The cafe's noise faded into a kind of muffled hush, the clinking cups, the low hum of conversation, all distant. When she finally spoke, her voice broke slightly. "I used to know an Angela. Many years ago." Naomi looked confused. "Really?" Margaret nodded slowly. "She worked for me once. A long time ago." Her hand closed gently around the locket as if it might disappear. Naomi's eyes softened. "She passed away a few years ago," she said quietly. "Cancer." Margaret's breath caught. "I'm so sorry." Naomi gave a small, polite nod, the kind of acknowledgement that carries grief without needing to describe it. Margaret looked down again at the locket, then back up at Naomi. Would you mind if I looked inside?" Naomi hesitated, then shook her head. "Go ahead." With careful fingers, Margaret opened it. Inside, behind a tiny glass window, was a faded photograph, 2 smiling faces. One was unmistakably younger Naomi, maybe 3 years old. The other was a woman in her 20s, arms wrapped protectively around the child. Margaret's eyes filled instantly with tears, because she knew that woman, not from a photograph, not from a name, but from memory, decades old. Still sharp, her voice trembled when she spoke again. "This necklace. This belonged to my daughter." Naomi froze. "What?" Margaret nodded slowly, tears gathering but not yet falling. "My daughter. Her name was Claire. She wore this every day until she went missing." Naomi's breath caught. "Missing?" "Yes," Margaret whispered. 30 years ago. She disappeared on her way home from work. We searched for years. All we ever found was this necklace, or so we thought. I kept a replica made just to remember her. She looked down at it again. But this one, this is hers. I'd know it anywhere. Naomi's mind raced. But how would my mother have it? Margaret's voice broke. That's what I need to find out. The cafe had gone quiet around them. A few nearby customers noticed the older woman's trembling hands. The young waitress standing frozen beside her table. Margaret wiped her eyes quickly, composing herself. Please, when do you finish your shift? 6 o'clock, Naomi said softly. Would you let me wait for you? Naomi nodded slowly, still unsure what to think. Margaret reached out, covering her hand gently. Thank you. Her voice was calm again. But her eyes, they were somewhere far away, caught between the past and the present. As Naomi returned to work, she glanced back toward the window where the elegant woman sat, the locket still resting in her open palm. Margaret's lips moved silently, almost like a prayer. That evening, neither woman knew what truth they would uncover, only that something deeply personal had just been stirred, and it would change both of their lives forever. The cafe had grown quieter by the time the clock neared 6. The evening light slipped through the windows, soft and golden, catching the faint steam that rose from coffee cups. Most customers had left, leaving only the last few murmurs of conversation. Naomi finished wiping down a table and glanced toward the corner. Margaret Whitmore still sat there, her tea long gone cold, her eyes distant as though she were watching something only she could see. When Naomi untied her apron, she hesitated, unsure if she was ready for what might come next. The story Margaret had told her, about the missing daughter, about the necklace, had sat heavy in her chest all afternoon. She finally took a breath and walked over. "Ma'am," she said softly, "I'm done for the day." Margaret blinked, coming back to the present. "Thank you, dear. Would you mind joining me for a moment?" Naomi nodded. Of course. They sat across from each other at the same window table, where the fading sunlight caught the fine lines in Margaret's face. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Margaret reached into her handbag and pulled out a small velvet pouch. From it she drew a necklace, almost identical to Naomi's, but newer, brighter, its chain heavier. "I had this made years ago," Margaret said quietly, after Claire disappeared. "The police found the original near her car, or at least that's what we believed. But this," she gestured to Naomi's locket now resting between them on the table. "This one has the engraving on the inside. Only the real one did." Naomi leaned closer. Inside, etched in delicate letters, were the words, "For my sunshine, love, Mom." Naomi's voice trembled. "Your handwriting?" Margaret nodded. "Yes, I had it made for Claire when she turned 18. Naomi stared at it, her heart pounding. "But my mother had this for as long as I can remember." She never said anything about where it came from. Margaret's expression softened. "Tell me about her." "About Angela." Naomi took a breath. She was kind, quiet, worked as a nurse's aide, always helping people who didn't have much. "We moved around a lot when I was little. She said we were looking for the right place to start over." Margaret frowned gently. "Start over?" "She never explained what that meant," Naomi said. "She just said she wanted me to have a safe life." Margaret looked down at her trembling hands. "Safe from what, I wonder?" Naomi hesitated. "You really think my mom's Angela was your daughter's friend?" Margaret smiled faintly. "More than a friend. Angela worked for my company's outreach program years ago. She and Claire met at one of the fundraisers. They became close, inseparable, really." She paused. "The last person Claire called the night she went missing was Angela." Naomi's breath caught. "Are you sure?" "I remember it like it was yesterday," Margaret said, her voice fragile. "The detectives thought Angela might have known something, but she disappeared from the city a few weeks later. We lost track of her completely." Naomi felt her chest tighten. "My mom never talked about that time. Just said the city wasn't kind to her." Margaret looked at her gently. "Maybe she was protecting you." Outside, the streetlights began to flicker on. Naomi twisted the napkin in her hands, her mind spinning. Margaret leaned forward. "Do you mind if I ask, was your mother ever in trouble?" Naomi shook her head quickly. "No, never. She was careful about everything. We didn't even have a car when I was little." Margaret nodded slowly. "That sounds like the Angela I knew, gentle but guarded," she sighed softly. I spent years wondering what happened to my daughter. No ransom calls, no signs of foul play. Just gone. It left a hole nothing could fill. Naomi's eyes softened. I'm so sorry. Margaret smiled faintly through her tears. Don't be. Tonight feels like the first time that hole has shifted, even a little. She reached across the table, gently placing her hand over Naomi's. Would you come to my home tomorrow? I'd like to show you something. I think it may help us understand what happened. Naomi hesitated. Are you sure? Yes, Margaret said softly. You look so much like her. I need to know, Naomi nodded slowly. All right, Margaret smiled through her tears. Thank you, dear. You've already given me more peace than I've had in 30 years. When Naomi got home that night, she sat on her bed with the locket in her hand. She traced the words inside with her thumb. For my sunshine, love, Mom. Her mother had called her Sunshine every morning when she woke her for school. She had always assumed it was just a nickname. Now she wasn't sure anymore. She opened the small photo inside again and stared at her mother's younger face. It looked slightly different than she remembered, almost like someone hiding behind a smile. For the first time, she wondered if her mother had carried more secrets than she ever let show. The next day, Naomi took the bus across town to the address Margaret had texted her, Whitmore Estate, Hillcrest Avenue. It was quiet, surrounded by trees and iron gates that swung open slowly as she approached. Margaret greeted her at the door with a gentle smile. I'm glad you came. Inside, the house was filled with sunlight and photographs, framed images of a family through the decades. Naomi's eyes paused on one in particular, a young woman with kind eyes and a familiar tilt of her smile. Margaret followed her gaze. That's Claire. Naomi stepped closer. Her pulse quickened. She looks like you, Margaret finished softly. Naomi stared at the picture in silence. Margaret nodded slowly, voice trembling. That's why I couldn't stop staring at you yesterday. You have her face. Naomi turned toward her, her own voice barely a whisper. Do you think my mom... Could she have known something about Claire? Margaret looked down, her expression heavy. I think she may have known everything. The next morning, sunlight poured softly through the tall windows of the Whitmore estate. Dust motes floated in the air, catching the light as Naomi followed Margaret through the quiet hallways, lined with framed photographs and paintings. Margaret moved slowly, her hand resting on the polished banister. I've kept most of Claire's things in her old room, she said quietly. I haven't touched much of it in 30 years. Naomi nodded, her heart thudding softly. The air carried the faint scent of lavender and old books, comforting but heavy with time. When they reached the door, Margaret paused. I suppose I was waiting for the right moment to come back in here. Maybe I was waiting for you. She opened the door gently. The room was frozen in another decade, floral wallpaper, a neatly made bed with a quilt folded at the foot, shelves of records and old magazines. Naomi stepped inside slowly, glancing at the small vanity table, where an old brush still sat beside a framed photo of Margaret and a young woman, Claire. Naomi felt her breath catch. Seeing the photo up close was like looking into a mirror through time. The same eyes, the same calm expression, even the faint dimple on the left side of the mouth. Margaret noticed her stillness and smiled sadly. Now you see why I was so shaken when I met you, Naomi nodded. It's uncanny. Margaret walked to the dresser and opened the top drawer. Inside were carefully folded letters, ribbons, and a few small trinkets. I used to read through these when I missed her, she said, but I never found anything that explained what happened until... She stopped mid-sentence, lifting a small box wrapped in faded paper. I found this 2 years ago when we had the floors replaced. It was hidden under one of the boards. Naomi frowned slightly. You never opened it. I couldn't bring myself to, Margaret said. It was addressed to Angela. I thought it might just reopen old pain. She handed the box to Naomi, her hand trembling. But I think you should be the one to open it. Naomi hesitated, then untied the fragile ribbon. Inside was a folded letter, yellowed and soft at the creases. Her fingers shook as she carefully opened it. The handwriting was elegant but familiar, the same looping style as the engraving inside the locket. Naomi began to read aloud. My dearest Angela, if you're reading this, it means I've made a choice I can't take back. I've told you things no one else knows, and I'm trusting you to keep them safe. You've been my only true friend, my sister in every way that matters. I'm leaving home tonight. Mother doesn't know. She wouldn't understand. I've made a mistake, one that would destroy her if she found out. You've always told me that love isn't something to hide. But the world isn't as kind as we want it to be. You once said you'd protect me no matter what. I'm counting on that now. Take care of her for me. Raise her in light, not fear. Tell her she was always loved. Her name is Naomi. Naomi stopped reading. The room fell utterly silent. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She looked up slowly at Margaret, whose face had gone pale. Margaret's hand gripped the edge of the dresser. "No," she whispered. "That can't be." Naomi's voice trembled. She said, "Take care of her for me." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Claire had a child. Naomi felt her chest tighten. "Me?" Margaret nodded weakly, tears spilling over now. "My daughter's child." The realization hit both women at once, heavy, overwhelming, but gentle somehow, like a truth that had waited patiently for decades to be spoken. Naomi sank slowly onto the edge of the bed, the letter still trembling in her hands. "My mother, Angela, she always said she adopted me when I was little," Naomi whispered. "But I never saw any papers. She just said I was hers and that was enough." Margaret sat beside her, barely breathing. "Angela saved you," she said softly. "She kept her promise." Naomi looked down, her tears falling silently. "She must have known it would hurt you." Margaret nodded slowly. "She probably thought she was protecting both of us. If Claire had left because of a secret, perhaps Angela was the only one who knew the truth." She wiped her cheeks. "Your mother wasn't hiding you from me out of cruelty. She was giving you a chance at peace." Naomi's hands tightened around the letter. "And all this time I thought she was just being cautious." Margaret smiled faintly through her tears. "Caution is how love survives when the world won't understand it." They sat together in silence for a while, the late morning sun warming the edges of the room. Naomi looked at the framed photo of Claire again, her own eyes staring back at her. "Do you think she'd have wanted me to know?" she asked softly. Margaret reached over, gently tucking a curl behind Naomi's ear. "I think she'd have wanted you to feel loved. The rest, she trusted time to reveal." Naomi's tears came then, quiet, shaking ones. Margaret pulled her close, wrapping her arms around her like she'd done for Claire decades ago. For the first time in 30 years, the older woman allowed herself to cry, as not from grief, but from release. She whispered into Naomi's hair, "I lost my daughter once. I won't lose my granddaughter too." That evening, Naomi walked home holding the letter close to her heart. The world outside looked the same. Cars, people, the hum of the city. But nothing felt the same inside her. Her mother's memory, once a mystery, had turned into a story of sacrifice. And the woman who'd once been just a stranger at a cafe window had become family. A week later, the Glass Garden Cafe looked the same as always. Soft light, the scent of coffee and almond pastries, but for Naomi every detail felt different. She moved with a lighter step now, her heart full of something that still didn't have the right word. Family. Maybe that was it. She still worked the evening shift, still greeted regulars by name. But now she wore the necklace not as a reminder of loss, but as a bridge between two women who had loved her in their own quiet ways. One afternoon, Margaret arrived again. No chauffeur this time, no designer jacket. She wore a simple sweater and carried a bouquet of pale daisies. Naomi smiled when she saw her. "You came back." Margaret returned the smile. "I couldn't stay away." Naomi poured her tea without asking. She already knew how she liked it, and sat across from her. For a long time, neither said anything. They just looked at each other, two generations joined not by time but by truth. Finally, Margaret spoke. "I've spent 30 years wondering why my daughter left that night. I kept asking, what did I do wrong?" Naomi reached across the table. "You didn't do anything wrong." Margaret nodded slowly. "Maybe not. But I also never told her enough how much I loved her. Sometimes love said too late feels like no love at all." Naomi squeezed her hand. "She knew. She told Angela she wanted you to be proud of her." "My mum said she cried when she talked about you." Tears welled in Margaret's eyes. "She called her Angela?" Naomi nodded. "Always. Said she was the kindest person she'd ever met." Margaret smiled through her tears. "Then your mother was an angel in more than name." When Naomi's shift ended, They walked together through the nearby park. Spring had started to show itself. Buds on the trees, the faint smell of rain in the soil. Margaret carried a small box in her hand. "I've been meaning to give you this," she said. Inside was a delicate bracelet of tiny golden links. Hanging from it was a charm shaped like a small sun. Naomi smiled softly. "It's beautiful." "It was Claire's," Margaret said. "I gave it to her on her 20th birthday. She used to call herself my sunshine." Naomi froze, the word hitting her like a heartbeat. "That's what my mom called me every morning." Margaret nodded, eyes shining. Then she kept Claire's nickname alive. Naomi fastened the bracelet carefully on her wrist. The charm glimmered in the light, soft and real. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're welcome, dear." Over the next few months, they began to meet every week. Tea on Thursdays, dinner on Sundays. The relationship unfolded naturally, without pressure or titles. Some days they talked about work, others about family recipes, sometimes about nothing at all. And little by little, Margaret started to heal. She stopped avoiding her daughter's room. She let sunlight in again. One afternoon, she invited Naomi over to help her pack Claire's things for donation. They laughed more than either expected, over old clothes, forgotten cassette tapes, and a half-finished diary that ended with a simple line, "I hope the people I love always find each other again." Naomi read it aloud, tears falling freely. Margaret wiped them away gently. "I think we just did," she said. 6 months later, they stood together at a small garden ceremony behind the Whitmore estate. The air was cool, filled with the hum of bees and the sound of wind through trees. A marble bench had been placed beneath a blooming cherry tree. On it was engraved, "Claire Whitmore, forever our sunshine," and Angela Parker, her light that never faded. Margaret laid a single daisy on the bench. Naomi placed her locket beside it for a moment, letting the sunlight touch it. Margaret turned to her, voice trembling but steady. "You've given me back something I thought was gone forever." Naomi smiled softly. "You gave me something I never had." They hugged, holding on for a long moment, not out of grief but gratitude, and for the first time in decades, Margaret didn't feel the weight of loss. She felt presence. The past hadn't been erased. It had been completed. That evening, Naomi returned to the cafe. She poured herself a cup of tea and sat by the window as the sky turned from gold to lavender. She touched her bracelet, then the locket at her neck, and whispered, "We found you." Outside, the lights of the city flickered to life, ordinary, steady, alive. Naomi smiled. She didn't need proof of miracles anymore. Sometimes love just takes the long way home.